Hi, I'm Holly, the Project Analyst in the Financial Intelligence Unit here on the Isle of Man. In a recent discussion with MLROs, the FIU was asked for further guidance on what is meant by suspicion under the Proceeds of Crime Act 2008 and when to make a disclosure under Section 24 of the Financial Intelligence Unit Act 2016. The meaning of suspicion is also central to the obligations imposed by the Anti-Terrorism and Crime Act 2003. We'll be referring to a number of pieces of legislation, case law and other references throughout this short video. We'll link them below for your guidance. Let's first talk about the relevant legislation and why we receive disclosures. Under Section 14 of ACCA, a person commits an offence if they know or suspect or have reasonable grounds for knowing or suspecting that another person has committed a terrorism financing offence under Sections 7 to 10 of ACCA, and the information on which the knowledge or suspicion or reasonable grounds of which is based came to them in the course of a business in the regulated sector, and they do not disclose the information to the FIU or a nominated officer. There is no definition of suspicion in ACCA. Under Section 142 of POCA, persons conducting business in the regulated sector, as defined in Schedule 4 of POCA, are required under POCA to submit SARs in respect of information that comes to them in the course of their business, if they know or suspect or have reasonable grounds for knowing or suspecting that a person is engaging or attempting money laundering. Failing to disclose such matters is a criminal offence. There is no definition of suspicion in POCA. And lastly, under Section 24 of the FIU Act, any person may disclose information to the FIU if the disclosure is made for the purposes of the exercise by the FIU of any of its functions. The FIU's functions under Section 5 of the FIU Act are receiving, gathering, analysing, storing and sharing information about financial crime whether in the island or elsewhere, assisting with the prevention and detection of crime and in particular financial crime whether in the island or elsewhere, cooperating with law enforcement agencies, and contributing to the reduction of crime, particularly financial crime, and to the mitigation of its consequences. When it comes to providing a defence to money laundering, or consent, the FIU can give consent to do a prohibited act, for example, carry out a transaction which may amount to money laundering, and thereby provide the reporter with a defence against money laundering under Section 151 of POCA. There is no such provision in the FIU Act, and it is therefore not possible for the FIU to give consent to do a prohibited act in relation to a disclosure made under Section 24 of the FIU Act. We often get asked, should I use POCA or the FIU Act? Where a SAR is submitted under POCA, the FIU can help the reporter to fulfil their AML or CFT obligations. By disclosing information under the FIU Act, the reporter is helping the FIU to prevent and detect crime. The decision to submit a SAR under POCA is founded upon suspicion. The meaning of suspicion under POCA can be difficult to pin down. The dictionary definition of suspicion is a feeling or belief that something is possible, likely or true, or a feeling or belief that someone is guilty of an illegal, dishonest or unpleasant action. The leading case from England and Wales, and therefore not binding but persuasive in the Manx courts, is Regina versus Silva. The Court of Appeal considered the meaning of suspecting under the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002 of England and Wales, and concluded that it meant that there is a possibility which is more than fanciful, a vague feeling of unease would not suffice. There is a possibility which was more than fanciful. However, there is no explanation of what is meant by fanciful or unease. This does not add a great deal to the ordinary meaning of suspicion. Following a recent comprehensive review of the SARs regime in the UK, the Law Commission concluded that it was both undesirable and impractical to create a precise and workable legal definition of suspicion that would add to the ordinary meaning. In its guidance, SAR regime good practice frequently asked questions, the UK NCA refers to Regina versus Silva, but states that this is a matter for the reporter to decide when the suspicion threshold is crossed. The NCA concludes that this should be a topic for the AML CFT training in the regulated sector. The Isle of Man FIU SARs Guidance states, "A person suspects or has reasonable grounds for suspecting that another person is engaged in money laundering when he or she recognises that this is a possibility which is not over-imaginative or unrealistic." There may be an aspect of a transaction or activity that is at odds with normal expectations and therefore raises suspicion, whether through inference, sight of documents, client comments, or professional insight and experience. Typically, suspicion will occur when something unusual is identified and subsequent research or checking confirms that there are abnormal or contradictory factors. Definite knowledge or evidence of facts is not required for suspicion or reasonable grounds for suspicion to arise. Receipt of a court order made under POCA or a request under Section 18 of the FIU Act should be a trigger or red flag event, causing a review of the relevant client relationships and client's conducts. If the review gives rise to further suspicion of money laundering or terrorist financing, a SAR should be made to the FIU. There is no need to submit a SAR if the only information is the fact of the court order having been made and or served upon the reporter, sometimes referred to as defensive reporting. The FIU understands that the difficulty the legislators and courts have had in giving a meaningful definition of suspicion can be a source of anxiety for MLROs and has tried to address this in the SARs Guidance. As suspicion is firmly rooted in the individual circumstances encountered by MLROs on a case-by-case basis, the SARs Guidance makes clear that the example of circumstances where suspicion may arise given must be underpinned by MLROs' professional insight and experience. Thank you for watching. We hope you found this useful. Don't forget to comment below if you have any questions or drop us an email at fiu@gov.im.